Hello everyone and welcome to MMA Start to Finish. I'm Julian and this is Matt.
Hi.
And today we're going to be talking about UFC 10, the tournament, the return of the tournament format, live from the the State Fair Arena in Birmingham, Alabama.
The progressive city of Birmingham, Alabama.
A common refrain for some reason in this telecast was the progressive city of Birmingham, Alabama. I don't understand it.
Progressive didn't really have the same meaning back then as does in this.
What did it mean back then?
Well, just like, I guess not what it means
When
now.
was Alabama ever progressive by any definition?
I don't know.
This is very no offense if you're from Alabama. It's just like an objective fact of history.
Yeah. Like you can, if you're from Alabama, you can understand in today's world, we're getting offhand.
Anyway, let's just keep it to the sublegal fights.
The event started off with this weird seeing eye test of a title card.
Yeah, I think the idea was the mantra or the catchphrase or the title for the show was UFC 10 seeing is believing. So
They want you to have
I think
good
the eye
eyesight.
test was a play on the seeing is believing. I think that's what that was. Which is dumb, but
I guess.
it's the 90s, bro.
Yeah, okay.
So a couple of not as many notes as UFC 9 to get to, not as fraught with legal troubles, still in a questionable legal state and stricken from most cable providers by this point, I believe. So the buy rate is down again. How much is the buy rate down, Matt?
We're down about 50,000 viewers.
Which, considering we're working with numbers that go from 140 to like 96,
Yeah.
that's like a, what is that, like a 30% decrease?
About
a 30% decrease in viewership. That's pretty bad, especially considering the drop-off we had from 8 to 9.
Yeah.
But again, keep in mind, these drop-offs are a direct result of the legal status of the sport, which is in jeopardy at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Another weird note that I didn't know before we checked Wikipedia about UFC 10 is that apparently I'm reading this from Wikipedia, a fictional UFC 10 staged at the Grand Olympic Auditorium is featured during one scene in the film Virtuosity, including an appearance from fighter Ken Shamrock. And I'm like, that was weird. Why wouldn't they just why wouldn't they just have the real event in the movie? Why do they have this weird alternate reality? Then I looked at the movie. The movie came out in 95, which means it was a movie based in the future, and they tried to predict UFC 10, which is really weird. Especially considering how, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Underground the UFC was at that point. It wasn't like it was a mainstream thing. It wasn't like they were projecting the NBA Finals a year later.
Yeah.
Just arbitrarily the UFC. I have not seen the film Virtuosity with Denzel Washington in it, apparently.
Nope.
And apparently it didn't make enough money at the box office to pay for itself.
No.
So that's not very good.
It having Ken Shamrock, this event does not include Ken Shamrock.
Yeah. So they didn't get that one quite correct.
Nope. They've made a slight change to the octagon where it is now wheelchair accessible, which...
It is a ramp now rather than stairs.
Yeah, we had a little back and forth on it as to whether it was a ramp or not, but it is a ramp. I don't think anyone really needed it this time.
Like, you mean getting carried out?
Yeah.
No one was injured so badly that they refused to show us the replay. So I think that's a good sign.
Yeah. It is also July in Alabama.
Yeah, fuck that.
It is
straight up.
Quite toasty. Many of the commentators were just in t-shirts.
Later on, we'll see Dan Severn, who elected to go. He's never heard of business casual, so he went in full blazer.
Yeah.
He knew he was going to be on commentary. He had to be ready for a potential future career.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't think Dan ever becomes like a regular fixture on commentary. That'd be kind of cool, though.
It would be.
He's not bad at it. He's all right.
No.
And he brings a good perspective as a fighter. Anyway, that's for way later. That's in the finals.
So, yeah. It's a weird setup right now. This wasn't even the original location that we were going to have this event in. It was supposed to take place in Providence, at the Providence Civic Center in Providence, Rhode Island. But I guess New York didn't want them there anymore.
Or Rhode Island
Rhode
didn't
Island.
want them in anymore.
I keep getting Long Island and Rhode Island.
It's a common mistake. I don't think you're the only person who trips over that.
I guess. It's such a tiny state.
No offense, Rhode Islanders.
Yeah. Mark Hall versus Don Fry is our first fight. Both of these people we've seen before. Don Fry had a little intro video. Everyone had these intro videos, which we'll go into that later. Don's was ending with, "Lock up your women and children because I'm coming out angry."
I gotta say, quite the promo from Don Fry. He's very good at talking to the camera, even if what he says would have gotten him in hot water in 2019.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a strange thing to say.
It's like the "lock up your women and kids" kind of. It's like that meme, but earlier.
Yeah, it is that. Yeah.
Also, Bruce Buffer. The first time we've seen him.
The first sighting of Bruce. He's finally here after managing, I forget what fighter previously, is now the announcer. We're reading here on UFC 10's page on Wikipedia. Apparently, Rich Goins comes back for UFC 11, but after UFC 11, I believe Bruce becomes a permanent fixture as the announcer.
Yeah. And I can't remember if we confirmed it in one of the previous episodes, but Michael Buffer is the brother of Bruce Buffer, so we have that confirmed now.
Yeah, I always forget if that's the case, but now I imagine it will stick in my noggin that we're putting it to recording.
Yeah.
I'd hope so.
Hopefully. So yeah, we finally have the legendary Bruce Buffer announcing these fights. He was okay at it.
Yeah, I mean, he's way better than Rich. Honestly, because I've seen these fights before, I've seen the beginning of Bruce Buffer's career. I remember him being a little sloppier. I was actually fairly impressed with his first ever UFC announcing job.
Do you think he was nervous?
He didn't seem like it. I'm sure he was. I mean, no offense, but this wasn't exactly like Madison Square Garden, okay? This was it was 4,000 rednecks, all right, in Alabama.
That wouldn't make you nervous?
A different kind of nervous, I suppose, than what you normally suspect if you were announcing a UFC event today.
All right. We had Mark Hall starting off with a spinning kick to Fry, but Fry pretty much ignores it and takes him down. He takes Mark down and starts just pounding into his ribs.
Full blast shots to the ribs for the duration of the fight. How long did this one go? This was 10 minutes of pain and suffering for Mark Hall. Don just unloading. I think he eventually switched up which side he was going to, too. Had to tenderize both sides of the rib rack.
Yeah, once one side turned purple.
It was pretty gnarly.
On the other side. And you pointed this out when we were watching it. Most of the times when you do body shots from on top of someone, it's to get them to move their arm down there. He's just hurting Mark.
Yeah, these were not strikes to open up position for a submission or to advance his position to get, headshots in. No, these were shots with the intention of finishing the fight. These were professional boxer blasts to the body.
Yeah, within, maybe 10 punches, we saw bruising.
It was almost immediate. It was crazy.
And it was, outlining his ribs. One of the announcers jokingly said, "I don't want to sneeze if I'm him," referring to Mark Hall tomorrow. So everyone knew that this is a terrible time for Mark.
Basically, the rule of thumb as a UFC fighter is during the fight, you have adrenaline, you feel fine, but the next day in your hotel room or in some cases in the hospital, that's when you feel the fight. So the next day for Mark Hall, I imagine involved a lot of ice packs.
Yeah.
And some Advil.
Fry threw in some more elbows to Hall's face, continuing to just almost break his ribs, but never quite.
So just pound the shit out of him, really.
Yeah. But Big John called it for Fry after 10 minutes of the savagery.
Just an endless tenderizing. Eventually, John mercifully steps in. It's hard to say it went on too long, because there were body shots. It's hard to adjudicate when to stop a fight because of body shots, but enough damage had been accumulated that I think the right call got made.
Yeah.
You don't want Don snapping one of those ribs and puncturing a lung.
Yeah.
That'd be real bad.
Hall was just in a world of pain for his body this whole time.
Up next, we have Scotty Fiddler. We're not sure. He's not an accomplished character. Does not have a Wikipedia page, so I apologize, Scotty. Versus Brian Johnston. Some interesting characters here. So Scotty is a kickboxer, and Brian is a kickboxer. But Brian apparently comes out of AKA, the American Kickboxing Academy. You may know AKA as the home gym of UFC champions Daniel Cormier, Cain Velasquez, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Luke Rockhold. One of the most accomplished gyms in the sport. So this is the first fighter, I believe, in the UFC from the American Kickboxing Academy. So that's pretty cool. I even noticed he had a little hat on that said AKA, and under it said World Champion Javier Mendez, who's one of the head coaches there.
Yeah.
And Scotty, would you like to tell us about the faux pas that was Scott's haircut?
So when he first came out, we didn't notice anything off about him.
He just looked like a bald dude.
Yeah. But when he turned his head, the ugly side came out.
The horror was revealed. This man had a full skullet. If you're unaware of what a skullet is, congratulations, you've gotten this far in life without knowing. Now I'm about to ruin it for you. A skullet. Imagine a mullet. Of course, hopefully you've seen these fights. You know what we're talking about. But for the uninitiated, a skullet is shaved head, bald head up front to the middle of your head. And then from like the equator of your head, the meridian, all the way to the back, just too much hair. Like a ponytail length of hair. It's, no offense, Scott, kind of fucking gross. Kind of gross, and I'm glad he lost. I didn't want to see him again.
We were not sad to see him go.
Not a huge fan of Scott Fiddler.
Like, no offense, but a different hairstyle. Just totally bald would have been better.
Dude, yeah, just shave your fucking head. And if you can grow that much hair, because it wasn't like, oh, this man was balding. No, he shaved. He shaved from his fucking, like, forehead all the way back. Anyway, we're not talking about the fight at all. Yeah. We're just talking about this man's haircut.
I described it as fight in the front, party in the back. That's where I'll leave it.
I'll leave it there as well. So the fight itself started out with a wild grappling exchange where Scott actually wound up on the back and for a little while rode out, I should say, that position, and it looked like he was actually going to obtain the upper hand during the fight. Brian was eventually able to turn things around and take his back. Now, you have some stuff about this fight too, right?
Yeah. It looked like Scott was getting his knee cranked, but Brian lost it. And so, in return, Scott took Brian's back from below, but Scott loses it, and then Brian mounts Scott's back. And then it kind of ends from there, from my notes.
Yeah, that's basically where the fight ends. Not that long of a fight, 2.5 minutes. Brian took back mount. And back in these days, shots to the back of the head, completely fucking legal. So, just beating the Christ out of Scotty. And eventually, Big John stepped in and mercifully ended the fight.
It was a pretty quick one.
2.5 minutes, so, yeah. Up next, we have the debut of UFC legend, future, or I guess, not future, by this tense, since we're talking about the event, future UFC legend, Mark Coleman, Mark the Hammer Coleman, making his debut against Madi Horenstein. So Mark, before this, of course, was in the Olympics. Let me see what year he was in the Olympics. Took 7th place overall in the 1992 Summer Olympics in Barcelona. So, another world-class wrestler making their way to the UFC. Madi apparently was in the Israeli military, so you gotta wonder if that dude's for sure killed people.
Yeah.
Just a thought. Didn't help me here, really. Mark was just much larger in every conceivable way.
He's a Goliath of a man.
Yeah, I mean, I think Madi tried some bitch-ass kick. Mark just ripped him down and immediately got him out.
Yeah.
Instantly.
It was a mess for Madi. Coleman is just... I described him as spaciously big.
Yeah, he's not just muscular. His muscles are like if he was a balloon and you like overinflated him. I gotta say, a reason I made the joke earlier about Supplement Fair Arena, a lot of these gentlemen would not pass USADA inspection today.
They take their vitamins and eat their vegetables. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they just like, when they were young, they made sure to drink a lot of milk.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
But the crazy thing is, as giant as Coleman is, he's only 15 pounds bigger.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I guess Mahdi was considerably taller.
He was quite taller.
But it didn't fucking matter. At all. Mark climbed on top of him, pounded him, gave him some headbutts.
Coleman actually held Mahdi's neck at one point just to punch Mahdi's face better.
Also, I believe Mark's corner was just shouting, choke him, like over and over again.
Big John, he stops the fight for Mark, but ends it with a kick to Mahdi's shoulder.
Yeah, he kind of ran in there clumsily to get Mark off of him because Mark was just headbutting the shit out of him. But in his haste, a swift boot to Mahdi's face.
Our last quarterfinals fight is John Campitella versus Gary Goodrich. Goodrich we know as Big Daddy. John is a high school teacher. And my God, is he a teacher.
Dude, so this is like, we said Mark looked inflated. You want to talk about a man that looks like a balloon animal? This dude came out to the octagon
roided to shit.
Yeah, and me and Matt were like, holy shit, look at that roided meathead from Jersey. That's crazy. Or I'm sorry, Staten Island. I don't want to disrespect a great borough of Staten Island.
This high school teacher is about to beat up your dad.
Yeah, dude. And it was funny because as he was walking up to the octagon, they mentioned just casually, oh yeah, teaches biology or some shit. Yep. And me and Matt were like, pardon the fuck you say to me? He teaches biology? Could you imagine if he was your biology teacher?
Fuck mitochondria. He is the powerhouse of the cell.
That's really good.
I'm glad you like it.
I'll let you talk about the... Go ahead.
Oh my God. Gary Goodrich came out with his crew all wearing Big Daddy shirts. And...
looking like he was advertising a film for Adam Sandler.
Yeah. By the way, everyone has had these little intro videos, but most of them are kind of tame. Gary Goodrich's... he came out saying it's time to get nasty.
And then pounded his fist like that.
Yeah. He's got some great intros. It started with just a clash of inflated muscle. Both of them tried to take each other to the ground, but neither one had anything good, so they both stood up. John gets some good hits on Gary's head, but John ends up in Gary's guard. By the way, Gary has his gi on in this Alabama heat.
Yeah, I guess he took off the gi that one time because it was so hot, and that was his first loss. So I imagine he wants to keep the gi on when he can now.
Yeah.
Even though by now he's also lost with the gi on.
And, well, he wins this fight with his gi, though. He didn't use the gi, but he has it on him.
So the stoppage was kind of weird. I think Gary had John's back, if I'm not mistaken, and was pounding away at him a little bit. He was on top of him, up against the cage, and holding onto the cage with one hand while he was wailing with the other. Got a really good shot off, and it looked like he was in a position to finish the fight. But in my opinion, John stepped in a little early. Because as soon as John steps in, the other John bucks, and Gary kind of comes off his back a little bit. But you gotta wonder if John didn't step in, if he would have been able to buck. So it's kind of a tricky situation.
Well, in the commentary later on, they actually mention that Big John steps in because he thought Campitella had tapped out.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. I do have in my notes here,
but it's
John tapped, question mark.
But it's not clear to any of us.
It seemed to me like he was just scrambling for position and, palmed the mat. It didn't seem like he was tapping, but I guess that's also why you don't see fighters tap on the mat anymore. You tap to your opponent. Mm-hmm. For twofold reason. One, you don't want an issue like that, really. And two, let your opponent know you're tapping so they stop whatever they're doing and you don't get whatever submission is being applied to you to its logical conclusion of pain and suffering.
Yeah. So, very questionable stoppage, but...
it's early. Yeah. I know I say that a lot, but I can't fault Big John too much for it. They're still developing what is the standard? You know what I mean? Like, we have all this backlog of, like, what is a fight, like, what a good stoppage looks like and what a bad stoppage looks like, because we've seen so many. That backlog of, you know, things to reference doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
So they're kind of making it up as they go to an extent. Because I mentioned this before, I believe, but one of the huge differentiators of MMA from boxing, not just in the actual sport, but in the rules, is that in boxing, if you get knocked down, you get a 10 count, right? And if you get knocked down again and again, they stop the fight. But in the UFC, if you get blasted and you're out and the ref steps in, the fight is over. Mm-hmm. You don't get up again and you get a 10 count. No. The fight's done. So
debatably safer.
Well, I would argue that definitely safer.
Yeah, I don't know. I said debatably.
No, I mean there's a debate. It's certainly, especially a lot of these early fighters. There's some of them now are having like some CTE and brain damage issues, but also that can be attributed to the way they trained back then too. They sparred hard in the gym all the time, which a lot of fighters know better now than to do. You can take some shots, you know, a couple times a year in a fight, like real bad shots, but the constant wear and tear on your brainstem is what leads to problems down the road. But that's a larger conversation for another day. Anything else on John and Gary?
Not too much. Just other than the weird stoppage, which we can't confirm with what footage we have.
Yeah. Up next, we have our first semifinal of the evening. Don Fry versus Brian Johnston. And special guest on commentary, Tank Abbott. Remarkably well behaved, in my opinion.
Yeah, he was a lot less
brash.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Brash.
So, I gotta say, when I looked at the draw here and I saw this is what we'd be getting in the semifinal, I was pretty excited. Brian looked promising. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of Don. And the fight was fairly interesting.
Well, Fry came out saying with his intro video, he said he was coming out to destroy this man.
Yeah, I'm going to destroy this man. He said it very calmly.
Yeah.
A lot of the fight consisted of them in, like, the tie clinch range with knees being thrown and, like, short uppercuts being thrown and a lot of grappling. Something I noticed from Don is it seems like he's really only comfortable using his striking from grappling range. If he were to, like, use his distance a little more, I feel like he could piece some more people up. Also, something I didn't mention earlier about Brian Johnston. In his fight with Scott, he threw out what looked like a couple hip tosses that led me to believe he had some judo experience. He confirmed that in his intro video for this fight, mentioning his skills in judo and kickboxing would lead him to victory or something along those lines. So that's the style matchup we have here. Kickboxer, judo player versus amateur wrestler, professional boxer. So a very interesting matchup. And I'd say it was fairly even. So I was actually impressed by Brian's hands. There was a couple striking exchanges there where I felt like Brian looked really good.
Yeah, with Fry, he took Brian to the fence. They started trading knees to each other's bodies, which is, it always looks painful. The whole thing is painful.
The whole thing
what
is
am I
pure
talking
pain.
about?
Yeah.
Then Brian takes Fry to the fence. Fry started taking some harder hits, but Fry took Brian onto the ground and took his back. Fry had side control. There started a USA chant. Both of them are U.S. citizens.
I should mention, though, we didn't mention this earlier, Brian was wearing the Captain America shorts, so I guess that's like a pseudo chant for Brian. It's still weird.
Brian taps after an elbow to the face from Fry, which I thought was to his eye, but it was way higher than his eye.
It was like on his temple, like above his brow line.
Our second semifinal fight starts with Mark Coleman versus Gary Goodrich. Lots of testosterone in this fight.
Two very large men who take their Flintstones gummies every day.
Mm-hmm. It started off with Goodrich defending the center, but Mark ended up in Gary's guard when they finally went to the ground. Gary had a pretty strong guard, I think, at the beginning of this fight.
Yeah, it seemed like Gary has a decent defensive posture, but Mark was just so much stronger than him and a far more experienced wrestler. And a lot of this fight was wrestling.
Some mean, gigantic headbutts from Coleman. By the way, everyone at this point, has MMA gloves.
Almost everyone.
Well,
Mark Hall didn't have gloves.
In the semifinals onward.
You're correct. All these people do have MMA gloves. Yep.
So, the people... That's rude to say. The people that matter. The people who are...
The most successful.
Yeah. Because that way they're not breaking their fucking hands.
It's almost like the gloves are indicative of your knowledge of the sport.
Yep.
So, after the tenderizing on the ground, they got back up to the feet, and Mark took Gary's back, and it looked like he was going to suplex him over his head, but Gary held onto the cage. And this is very funny. So when he grabbed onto the cage, they were in front of Mark's corner. Mark could get advice from his guys. He could hear them. Gary decided, fuck all that. Started scaling the fence horizontally. Made his way over to his corner. Didn't do him too much good being over there.
No. It didn't seem like either corner, whatever information they were giving out, the fighters
wasn't being
really,
followed.
Yeah, they weren't listening, or it just wasn't good information.
That's highly likely that it just wasn't good information yet.
So, it was because from Gary's corner, it just looked like his coach or his team was just kind of standing there watching.
Well, Gary's team is, they did give him a fourth-degree black belt for a sport I should say a discipline he just picked up. So you gotta question how legit they are.
Yeah.
His camp. Mark, from the position of grabbing Gary's back, got some uppercuts in underneath and blasted Gary some more. It was a pretty dominant performance by Mark. A lot of this tournament was a dominant performance by Mark.
Yeah. So this fight ended with Mark getting on top of Gary's back, and Mark got his hooks into Gary's legs and flattened him out, and before anything else could happen, Goodrich was tapping as quickly as he could.
Dude, I don't blame him. From that position, you have two options. One of them, way worse. Option A, get fucking strangled by a guy who has like 30 pounds on you and is an Olympic wrestler.
And is mounting your back.
Yeah, because from that position, that's perfect position for a rear naked choke in today's game, right? But again, it's the 90s, bro. Guess what's legal? Full blast elbows to the back of your damn head. So, I'm sure Gary was aware of that, realized what was about to happen, didn't really want to gamble with the Russian roulette there with 3 bullets in to find out if he was going to get choked out, which would have been relatively painless, or if he was going to lose his sight. So, elected to tap. A pretty smart decision, all things considered.
I feel like Gary's in a league that he's not quite ready for yet.
Yeah, Gary certainly has the physical talent to be a successful fighter, but it doesn't seem like he has the technical acumen yet to take out the top guys in the sport. Yeah. He seems like, I don't want to use the word a gatekeeper, because that's a little bit of a disrespect to the Big Daddy, but he's certainly the level of skill before the elite.
He may be Big Daddy, but he hasn't quite learned the discipline of father strength.
He does not quite have dad strength. Mark did make him look like his son.
Yeah, Mark's just the Hulk. My
yeah,
God.
Yeah, he actually looks like Lou Ferrigno. It's kind of funny.
Like, make him as tall as Paul Varlan's.
Oh my lord.
And I don't think they'd let him in. No, they would definitely let him in because of what they're trying to do. But no one would ever want to fight him. Maybe Dan Severn. Dan Severn might fight him.
Now we are down to the final fight of the evening. The grand finale of UFC 10, the tournament. Mark Coleman versus Don Fry. Pretty exciting fight. Both these guys, two of the more elite fighters we've seen in the UFC to this point. Even though this is, Mark's first event, he's kind of run through these guys like butter.
Yeah.
So he was looking real good. And, of course, Don had won the tournament before, won his fight at UFC 9. So a pretty climactic tournament for a card that didn't have the star power of a Ken Shamrock or a Dan Severn or a Hoist Gracie. They came away pretty good as far as the product is concerned, even if it didn't have star power.
Yeah, he just has the strength to just make everyone bend to his will.
Had a very similar first tournament performance as Dan Severn. Speaking of Dan Severn, like we said before, Daniel on commentary here to join us for the main event. And What I have here is my first note for the fight. Is Don initiates grappling and immediately regrets it.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of a common refrain for this whole fight. He clearly has a striking advantage when it comes to Mark, because Mark was just a pure wrestler. That's what he does. He can pound you on the ground. He's the hammer, but he's not a boxer. Don's a boxer. If Don had endeavored to keep this on the feet, I feel like he would have done a lot better. I don't know if he would have been able to keep it on the feet, but he didn't really try. He initiated the grappling, which I find baffling when a guy has, what, fucking 60 pounds on you?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Like, Don Fry isn't a small man. He's a large man. But Mark Coleman is an extra large man.
Yeah, I think that's what Jeff Blatnick said. What we have here is we have a very large grappler versus a large grappler.
And the difference is very apparent.
So yeah, this is a very good case for weight classes, because these are both elite fighters who you want to see more of. And it doesn't really make sense to just feed the smaller guy to the bigger guy. You could have them both be stars, provided you have weight classes, so maybe in the future.
They already had the David versus Goliath event.
Yeah, I feel like also the novelty of the no weight classes, no rules, that whole attitude is starting to die off, which is a good thing.
Yeah, because then eventually you'll just... If they left things as they are right now...
Somebody was going to die.
I wasn't even going to say that. I was just going to say... It's just going to get progressively heavier and heavier and heavier, and that's going to limit the amount of people you can have in here.
Exactly. You're only going to have heavyweights.
Yeah, and it basically just becomes...
That's a good point.
Heavyweight boxing plus kicks.
One of my notes I have here is I see why he's the hammer. A lot of this fight really just consisted of Mark on top of Don, pounding Don. There were a few times where it got back to the feet, but even from there, the strikes Don threw transitioned straight back into grappling. There was one really a couple scary moments for Don where Mark was in prime position for a brutal knee to the head. I think he connected with one of them. He didn't finish the fight with it. But even when they were on the ground and Mark was in side control, he was threatening with some pretty scary stuff.
I don't think Mark quite knew
what he couldn't do.
Yeah, like he didn't realize what he had in his arsenal.
It seems like, and I believe Jeff mentioned this during the fight, the tendency of wrestlers to have a problem finishing, because they're not used to finishing fights. In amateur wrestling, it's a positional game. That's kind of the whole point. You're not really... I mean, you can get... To my knowledge, I don't have a ton of knowledge about amateur wrestling itself, but I believe you can get submissions in amateur wrestling. So... But it's not the focus of the sport. We're here, the focus is finishing. So a lot of these wrestlers, not exactly ready for that yet.
No, they are not. I like Mark's... I want to say signature move. I hope he keeps doing this to make it a signature move. Of grabbing his opponent's face to then punch it better.
Holding him in place for the hammer.
Don, I really like Don, but he just got his ass whooped in this.
Yeah, again, another clear case of this dude's too fucking big.
Yeah, Mark got in an anaconda choke, but he slipped out before it got too serious.
He didn't have really great position for it. He was sort of on the side instead of on top of Don, so Don was able to, basically get to his feet. I believe that was one of the times the fight got back to the feet before quickly back to the ground.
Well, they did both get up, but they kind of gave each other a knowing look and just took a moment to breathe.
Yeah, and John yelled at him. He's like, "Come on, guys, you gotta go!"
It's like, you can't make them fight. They're going to take a breath if they can. And... they were both exhausted because this is the tournament style, and Mark especially, he's a big guy. He doesn't have a whole lot of reserves in him.
Potential foreshadowing. I wonder how much longer they can sustain this tournament format, and I wonder if this event sent the wrong message, because I'd say this event went really well, and it was a return to the tournament format.
It did go really well.
So I wonder how much longer we're going to have to endure the tournament format now that it went well again.
Mm-hmm. Twice we had doctor stoppage for cuts, and we had just the fighters stopping their fight just to take a breather.
Yeah, again, the tournament thing. You're going to be, especially when you're packing that much muscle, you're going to get pretty tired. That's just a law of nature. When you're that big, your cardio is usually not up to snuff.
That much unnatural muscle.
when you're that spaciously big, as someone I know would say.
Yeah. At one point, Mark lifted Don, and Don could have been thrown out of the ring had he not grabbed onto the top of the, what is it, the fence?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And briefly after that, Mark would be on top of Don, throw in, I believe, what eventually stopped the fight was a pretty vicious headbutt, and John ended it. It was enough already.
Yeah. Was it doctor stoppage, or did John stop it?
I think John stopped it.
All right. Because
what does it say here on Wikipedia? It says TKO punches, so that leads me to believe it's a ref stoppage.
Yeah.
At least officially in the records here, it's a ref stoppage.
Big John, he had seen enough. Don's face was swollen.
He went from a nice, handsome man to Nicolas Cage in that film with the bees.
Yeah. Not a good look for Don.
Swole, but not in the way you want to be.
So this was 11 minutes of brutality for Don. Not that he didn't get a few good hits on Mark, but it just didn't add up on Mark. After the fight, we got a short interview with Mark, and the big thing he talked about was that he underestimated the endurance of the other fighters. And I think part of that is just because he didn't have a whole lot of endurance. Don, he's really good on the ground, and he didn't give up until he was told he couldn't fight.
Yeah, Don could have easily tapped several times during this fight and elected to keep getting tenderized. Which, you know, kudos to him for having the heart, but also, when you can't remember where your glasses are when you're 56, you'll remember those punches, that's for sure.
Yeah. And again, with the tournament format, endurance, nowadays people can run out of breath before the end of a 15-minute fight.
Yeah.
These guys are doing, well, probably adds up to 15 minutes.
Well, hypothetically, had all these fights gone to decision, because what's it, like 15 or 12-minute rounds, something like that? Or rounds. Fights. There's no rounds. It had technically, hypothetically, you won, and won every fight by decision. You could have fought for 36 minutes, or 45. No, that math doesn't add up.
Something like 45, 50 minutes.
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah.
Let me do that math again. So anywhere
12, 15, and then overtime.
Yeah, okay.
So 45 minutes exactly.
There you go. So no one's fighting that long today. Thank God. No one should sanction that.
Yeah, that's some, especially when the prize money is $15,000. It got lowered from $50,000 to $15,000.
Bitterly disappointing, I'm sure, but you know, they're not raking in as much revenue when they're being banned from most cable providers.
Yeah.
The future of the sport is in peril right now, but we know it survives. Next time, let's see what we're going to be looking at. Up next, we have UFC 11, the Proving Ground. The poster is just Tank Abbott's face. Not his head, his face. Just his face.
The entire thing is his face.
That's going to do it for us, guys. Thanks so much for watching. If you're listening on YouTube, please be sure to hit the like button. Leave a comment. Let us know what you thought of the fight to UFC 10. What was your favorite fight? Oh, and before we go, I almost forgot. Our fight of the night. What do you want to give our fight of the night to?
I like this final one.
I'm happy giving it to the final fight. It's a good microcosm of the event for Mark. Pure dominance while not having exactly the best finishing abilities.
Yeah.
So, until UFC 11 and Tank's face, we'll see you guys next time.
Adios.